Hello, and thank you for joining me today on behalf of United Patients Group to talk about cannabis for autism harm reduction. My name is Jana Champagne, and I'm a registered nurse specializing in cannabis therapy and also a medical advisor and patient advocate for United Patients Group. So first, I want to talk a little bit about my journey to becoming a cannabis nurse. So my journey began as a cannabis patient after suffering a complete health collapse back in 2012 and seeking answers for my related symptoms, including severe chronic pain. And so I started cannabis as an alternative to opioid pain medications, and cannabis went on to create some really amazing results for me, including complete reversal of autoimmune disease. And so this really perked my interest as a nurse. You know, it makes us wonder when we see a natural substance that can boast results that pharmaceuticals can't even touch. So I began learning and doing a deep dive into the research to try to understand this plant and how it could do these amazing things. As it so happens, I'm also a special needs mom, and I have a teenage daughter with autism. And a couple of years into my own health recovery, my daughter suffered an autism puberty crisis. This is common to about half of kids with autism, and it exhibits as extreme level behaviors, sudden onset. And my daughter almost overnight went from being this sweet, cuddly, eager to please little girl to the puberty monster, where she was exhibiting aggressive behaviors towards others, self-injurious behaviors, where she would take her fists and whack herself in the head. She also destroyed my property. My home had holes in every wall and holes through doors, for example. And cannabis was successful in alleviating her symptoms, which in retrospect were largely pain related. And between that and her limited ability to communicate, this was how her behavior was communicating to us that there was a problem. And cannabis alleviated that and actually spared her out of home placement, which was a risk due to the safety issues from those behaviors. So these health outcomes, my own and my daughter's, really drove my passion for learning about this plant and following cannabis patient needs, because the needs are profound and there aren't a lot of resources to help educate patients. And so my first roles, of course, was as a patient, and then I began growing medicine for my daughter and myself, and that led to caregiving and educating patients, which was my next big role. And since 2015, I've educated thousands of patients on a one-to-one consulting basis. I'm also medical advisor and patient advocate to United Patients Group and have done patient consulting through them since 2015. And so I'm considered a clinical application specialist because of the extent of my experience in this area. I'm also a content author, and I write articles for several different cannabis publications. So that's sort of how my career in this industry has morphed. I'm also a medical professional cannabis educator, and I have accredited content on medical cannabis for nurses. And as of this year, I'm also a college professor teaching graduate medical professional students about cannabis science at John Patrick University's Masters of Integrative Medicine program with a cannabinoid concentration. So that's been very rewarding. And I find that educating medical professionals is a route through which I can reach more patients than I ever could alone. So it's been a great progression in my career. I'm also president of Autism Safe Haven, which is a 501c3 nonprofit focused on cannabis inclusive autism care resources. Obviously, this stems from the needs I'm seeing in the cannabis autism community and how there are just such scant resources for their options to choose cannabis as medicine, which I'm very passionate about after having seen cannabis makes such a big difference for the families that I have served in educating about cannabis. I'm also an award-winning medical cannabis product developer for Unity Formulas, which has targeted use blends. Their neurological line was produced with autism in mind, and they also white and private label. And they also meet the flow criteria, which is evidence-based and supported by research as optimal therapeutic quality products. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those today as well. So here's a brief overview of today's presentation. We're going to talk about the endocannabinoid system and really talk about the basics of why cannabis works so well for autism and the system in our body that facilitates this benefit. We're going to talk about cannabis for autism and explain specifically how different forms of cannabis might benefit autism symptoms. We're going to talk about the etiology or the different causes or underlying imbalances that we find in autism. And these are physical imbalances, and these present symptom targets that we can then match up with correct cannabis formulations to hopefully improve quality of life in the family's situation as an overall benefit. We're going to talk about the different cannabinoids and terpenes. There are many of these. And so it's really important to know which ones might be beneficial and which ones might, not be as beneficial for autism. We're going to look at some of the considerations of patients that have autism and how we need to make sure that we're mitigating and weighing the risk versus benefit of utilizing cannabis for autism. And then at the end, we're going to kind of wrap it all up and talk about cannabis for autism harm reduction, comparing cannabis with the pharmaceutical options and other approaches that are available for autism treatment. So our endocannabinoid system is very important. This is inside our body, and it's a system that works a lot like the endocrine system in that it creates substances and it also has receptors throughout the body. So the endocannabinoids are these substances that the endocannabinoid system produces. These are vital nutrients, and they float throughout the body and bind with endocannabinoid receptors, and they're so critical that they're actually argued as necessary for life. So very, very important. These are vital nutrients that help our body stay in an optimal homeostatic state, which is really what we're after for having really profound health benefits. Endocannabinoid system produces these endocannabinoids, also has receptors and enzymes that break down the cannabinoids in the body. And when the receptors interact with the cannabinoids that are floating around, it promotes homeostasis or balance. It also mitigates our stress and activates a restore phase, which is our E to relax, forget, sleep, protect. This phase is just profound in its ability to promote optimal health. So very, very, very important, and recover from illness as well. This is kind of our recovery phase. So cannabinoid sources, we talked about these endocannabinoids that our bodies produce. The precursors to these endocannabinoids that we make are omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, which of course tend to be really deficient in our standard American diet. So this is one reason why somebody might not be able to make enough endocannabinoids to have optimal health. We also have plant-sourced cannabinoids. The most prolific source of the plant cannabinoids, or phytocannabinoids we call them, is a plant called Cannabis sativa L. And the Cannabis sativa L plant produces more than 165 cannabinoids. And this is what we know of so far. To be fair, we're very much in our infancy in our knowledge of this plant due to the prohibition that lasted almost a century, started in 1937. And so we're still trying to catch up on our knowledge, but what we do know already is just mind-blowing and amazing. There are also fungal plants that produce what we call mycocannabinoids. And so that's another potential source for plant or phytocannabinoids. Now, there are great similarities between the phytocannabinoids that are derived from plants and the endocannabinoids that we produce internally. And so THC, which is a cannabinoid from the plant Cannabis sativa L, and anandamide, which is an endocannabinoid that we produce, work exactly the same way in the body. The body doesn't differentiate between these two substances. And as a little topic of interest, there's research supporting that autism is anandamide deficiency as one underlying contributor. So when we consider this and also consider that anandamide, which basically is THC in the body, its most prolific source is human breast milk, which we know is the perfect human food. It really defies logic why THC is Schedule I placed and not accessible to our population. Well, we know it's a vital nutrient, it's found in breast milk. Oh, and by the way, it's a deficiency found in autism. So these are all things to think of logically as we go through, and it really helps to break down the stigma around cannabis use. Similarly, we have CBD and 2-AG, or 2-arachidonoglycerol. CBD is from the plant, 2-AG is an endocannabinoid that we produce in our bodies. Once again, really similar in chemical structure, and they have the same mechanism of actions or response in the body. The body doesn't differentiate between these two things. So this really helps us understand why cannabis can be so beneficial for so many different conditions, because there's a term that was coined by Dr. Ethan Russo back in 2004, and he updated and wrote another paper about it in 2012. If you're a research buff, you might want to look those up. And he coined this term endocannabinoid deficiency. This means somebody is in a state where they cannot produce enough endocannabinoids. And as an aside, endocannabinoid deficiency results in these systemic imbalances, and it's linked with every chronic illness. Now, when you consider that the underlying cause of all disease is underlying imbalances, this really helps explain why supplementing with cannabis, which seamlessly fills in for deficiency in endocannabinoids that we produce, can come in and help promote balance and be beneficial for so many different conditions. And this is important to understand and important to know, especially for medical professionals, because there is a stigma around medical cannabis for medical professionals that don't understand the science, which, by the way, is still not being taught in medical school or nursing school. And so to help them understand why it can be good for so many things. And no, it's not because it's, just a snake oil. This is one of the red flags that goes up in the mind of medical professionals who hear cannabis is good for everything, that there really is science that helps us understand why that is. And so there are many, many causes of endocannabinoid deficiency. We already talked about dietary causes. If somebody is lacking omega-3 and 6 fatty acids, they might not be able to produce enough endocannabinoids. We can also have genetic mutations in either the endocannabinoid system or in the receptors that make it difficult for the body to utilize endocannabinoids correctly. There can be environmental factors, meaning somebody is living a lifestyle that actually promotes an increase in their imbalances. And this can actually lead to illness, which becomes kind of a downward spiral where the endocannabinoid system can't keep up with these imbalances that are causing the chronic illness. It gets depleted trying to keep up. And so the endocannabinoid system imbalance can cause chronic illness, and the illness can cause endocannabinoid system imbalance. So this becomes kind of a downward spiral for patients. And supplementing with cannabis plant or phytocannabinoid treatments can actually fill in seamlessly for the lack of endocannabinoids in this ECS deficiency status and help to stop and even begin to reverse this cycle. So this is where it's so high impact for chronic illness patients that begin medical cannabis therapy. So here's a little page to help explain some of the physical underlying contributors to autism and autism symptoms. Now, as a nurse and an autism mom, I have been studying biomedical aspects of autism since 2004. And so a very, very long time. There aren't many treatments that I've heard in working with parents of kids with autism that have surprised me or that I have not seen before or even tried before. We've tried just about everything ourselves. And so there are many underlying conditions that are often missed with autism because our kids, a lot of them have difficulty with communication. They have difficulty expressing when they're in pain or when they're having a problem. And so in mainstream medicine, their approach to autism is sort of like throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks, because they see these families that are desperate and they're not taught about cannabis. They're not taught that there are other ways to target it, or that there might be underlying physical imbalances in the gastrointestinal, immune, and neurological systems. This is all backed by science. There's a high likelihood of pain and inflammation with autism. Now, we need to remember autism is a spectra disorder, meaning we have mild, moderate, and severe presentations and impacts. So you can have everything from the child that is high behavior, nonverbal, with intellectual impact or academic impact, for example, to the child that is either ADD, ADHD, or even a child that doesn't have any of the academic challenges and their genius level and Asperger's type of presentation, which, they say Einstein was Asperger's. So there's all of that falls under this big umbrella of autism. And so just like there are so many different presentations, and you may have heard this before, if you know one child with autism, you know one child with autism. They're all very individual in their impact. And so because of that, the approach for these kids can really differ as well. You know, it's common that they have comorbid ADD or anxiety. There can be tics or seizures. Sleep disruption is extremely common. And then we have that severe presentation, which is non-limited verbal behaviors, aggression, self-injury, tantrums, property destruction, those sorts of things. So what the research supports around cannabis is that supplementation can promote balance in the gastrointestinal, immune, and neurological systems. Now, if you look up on, you know, the #1 item on underlying conditions for autism is imbalances in GI, immune, and neurological systems. So this is part of why cannabis is so effective for targeting autism, because it's targeting these systems that have gone defunct in autism presentation. It's targeting them specifically. And what the research supports is that that autism improvements of the symptoms occur in about 80% of those that begin the cannabis therapy for autism. And these were moderate to significant quality of life improvements that were reported by the parents or the families of those with autism. So pretty powerful to know that we have this tool that can help these kids. So I like to think of cannabis for autism also as palliative care. Now, palliative care is a term that has recently been expanded to include not just those that might be end of life and comfort care, but those with chronic illness that need comfort. And what we find is that when someone with autism starts cannabis therapy, it's really common that they reduce their reliance on pharmaceuticals, they improve their quality of life and function off the meds or with decreased meds. They de-escalate crisis situations for these families, which is so high impact. If you've ever been in a situation with your child where you feel like it's pushing you to that crisis edge, you may resonate with that. And we also, when we objectively look at the risk versus benefit of cannabis versus the other approaches, cannabis with its unsurpassed safety profile and mild if any side effects really proves to be the no-brainer as a starting point for these kiddos. Instead of try everything else, and when everything else fails, then maybe try the cannabis for autism, which is what we commonly see because medical professionals don't understand it. They don't see it as a viable option, unfortunately. And so part of the reason I'm so passionate about educating is because I really would like to see a shift in how we're approaching autism treatments in this country. So more science is that autism is endocannabinoid deficiency. We talked about this on the last couple of slides that, you know, when you don't have enough endocannabinoids, you're going to have an increase in the underlying imbalances because of that downward spiral. So supplementing with cannabis is very logical for autism. And also the fact that cannabinoids are vital nutrients for health. And so the fact that they are limited or restricted at all just makes zero logical sense. So once again, we need to step back and remember that the science outweighs the stigma across the board with cannabis. So I want to do a little review on the different cannabinoids that are available. One of my favorites, and the first one that I started with my daughter, is a cannabinoid called THCA. This is a weak CB1 agonist. It's not intoxicating at all. It's a raw form of THC. So we produce THCA. Some people will eat or blend or juice the flowers of the raw cannabis plant. Some people will take raw flower that's been dried and cured and infuse it into an oil to make a tincture. Those would both be acceptable raw forms of cannabis, which are going to give you THCA. And some of the uses in autism or indications for THCA include inflammation and pain and seizures. So once again, THCA was the first one we started with my daughter. She was a young teenager, and I had done enough research to be cautious about using THC with her. So we began with the THCA, and boy, was it high impact. It was Golden's Organics Healing Oil. And boy, once we started it with her and saw how it decreased her behaviors and improved her quality of life, I made sure that we always had that in stock. And she's taken THCA every day since, which has been about 5 years or so. So a very long time, and it's still highly effective for her. THC is another great option for autism. We talked about how autism is coincides with anandamide deficiency. And anandamide is that endocannabinoid we produce that mimics THC from the plant. And so these kids, we're filling a vital nutrient deficiency when we supplement a child with autism with THC. It's also a CB1 agonist, and the CB1 receptors are mostly in the brain, so that makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, THC is federal Schedule I drug against all logic because it meets 0 of the 3 criteria for Schedule I placement. And we've been fighting this scheduling since 1988, and we've had federal DEA judges agree with us that THC does not belong on Schedule I since 1988. So here we are 30 plus years later, still fighting this same fight. So once again, it's important to remember that the restriction of cannabis is profit motivated, not in the best interest of patients, that there's no logic behind it whatsoever. And I'm going to continue advocating and fighting until access to cannabis is a basic human right once again, like it used to be. THC is profoundly intoxicating. So that's one of the things, there are some considerations around that, using that with children. And, you know, the uses for autism specifically of THC supplementation include insomnia, pain, stress, meltdowns, or sensory overstimulation, because THC is neurosuppressive. So when we see these kids with autism that have sensory difficulties, they seem to have holes in their sensory filter. And so what somebody like myself might consider to be normal sensory input can just put their brain into overload. So that sensory suppression can really be beneficial, not to mention all of those other uses for THC. I have found it to be such a powerful tool for a child that is ramping up and going into a crisis situation or a major tantrum, and a little bit of THC in a fast acting form can actually stop it in its tracks. So very, very powerful tool for those that can access it and those that are comfortable with it, of course. So then we have CBD, or cannabidiol. CBD is a CB1 antagonist. It also interacts with a bunch of other receptors as we have listed there. We don't even yet fully understand all of the mechanisms of cannabis. This is what we know so far. We do know that CBD is not intoxicating at all. It is mildly stimulating and can be anti-sleep. So you want to make sure that if you're trying to target calming or sleep, that you're using a calming or sedative formulation of CBD, because in its normal state, it does tend to be a little stimulating. It is multiple use. It has the most research supported indications, mostly because it's been cleared for research. You know, it is federally legal thanks to the 2018 Hemp Act. You can access CBD in every state of the United States legally without having to worry about any ramifications. That said, for children, I always recommend that you have a doctor's signature for any form of cannabis to protect yourself as a parent. So, but it is highly accessible. And so this becomes a good answer for autism parents that are just starting out, or they're in a state where THC is not facilitated. Some of the indications or uses for CBD in autism include pain, anxiety, depression, gut and immune imbalances, and psychosis. And all of those indications, all of the indications on this page are supported by research studies. So it's all evidence-based, and this is what the research is teaching us, which is, you know, of utmost importance, especially when you're talking to a medical professional about cannabis. The research can be very eye-opening for them. Here's a couple of more cannabinoids, and I really, you know, there's 165 cannabinoids in the plant, but I really focused on the ones that are commercially available. And so that's why this list is a little shorter. So CBG is another really high impact cannabinoid. It's a CB2 agonist, and it's not intoxicating either. It is also mildly stimulating. So if you have a child that's sensitive to stimulants, you want to be wary of that. It is indicated for use for promoting gut and immune balance. So it can be really helpful for supporting any symptoms that are related to the gut or the immune system in autism. And some of the other uses for autism include neuroinflammation. There's actually research supporting that when a brain is in an inflamed state, which is one of the underlying contributors to autism or symptoms of autism, depending on how you want to look at it, that the CB2 receptors in the brain will upregulate, and the body will produce more of these CB2 receptors in the brain when it's inflamed. And so we can expect that we will find a lot of CB2 receptors being produced in the brain of a child with autism. And CBG is a great way to target those receptors and fill in, because when the body does that and it produces and upregulates receptors, it's like it's begging for interaction with those receptors. And so this is a way to facilitate what the body is requesting. CBG has also been shown to benefit in research, neurotransmitter imbalance specific to GABA and glutamate. And so high glutamate is linked with autism. This is why most of our kids are in a highly stimulated state, is because glutamate is very, very stimulating. And glutamate toxicity can actually stimulate our neuron cells in the brain to the extent of cell death, and then begin a cascade of neuroinflammation, contributing more to this common underlying cause of autism. So once again, using CBG can actually help to kind of halt and reverse that process, which is very high impact. There's no research behind this one, but in my experience with many, many families with children with autism, trying different cannabinoids, I have found CBG to be really high impact for helping to improve speech problems in autism, which are common, and also focus problems in ADD and ADHD. So those are some of the uses of CBG specifically for autism. CBN has been such a lifesaver for my daughter. And when we began CBN, it's been about 1.5 years ago now, because it's one of the newer cannabinoids on the market. And geez, I remember back when CBD wasn't even available readily. So things have really changed in the time that I've been in this industry. But CBN has helped my daughter get consistent sleep for the first time in her life at age 19. So very, very high impact. As we know, sleep is often disrupted in those with autism. And as a parent, you know, if your child's not sleeping, you're probably not sleeping either. So many families have tried CBN and found it to just be a lifesaver in them getting the rest that they need. It is a degradation product of THC, so it works similarly to THC. It's a CB1 agonist. It also interacts with a couple of other pathways you'll see there. Extremely sedative. It is intoxicating. But luckily, CBN is one of the cannabinoids that is allowed under the 2018 Federal Hemp Act. So this is a great option for families that might be in a state that doesn't allow THC, and they don't want to risk it legally trying to get THC for their child. And so CBN can be a great alternative, and it tends to be calming in smaller dosages. It can really help to reduce behaviors and stop those tantrums in their path without breaking any laws or having to worry about using THC if you're not supposed to be. So once again, very powerful tool for autism, for insomnia, and neurosuppression, really calming the neurological system in autism. And then the next one we have, and the last one on the list today, is CBDA. This is the raw form of CBD. Just like we can get THCA from a cannabis plant that is dominant in THC, and prepare that in a raw way where we're not heating it. We can do the same thing with a plant that is dominant in CBD and take raw forms of that plant to access CBDA for supplementation. So CBDA is not intoxicating at all. It can be infused into oil. It can be put, fresh flower into a blender or juicing or even eaten to get your CBDA. And this is also a newer one that's on the market. It's newer in the research, but what we know so far is that CBDA seems very powerful for inflammation. It's a COX-2 inhibitor, according to the research, which means it works similarly to Advil and Tylenol. So it can be good for pain and also for gut imbalances. And what we're finding, according to the research, is that CBDA actually promotes balance in the microbiota in the gut, which we know is an imbalance that's really common in autism. So, and also good for nausea, which I didn't list on there, but that's another research supported indication for CBDA. So lots of potential benefits and uses of these cannabinoids for autism. So then, in addition to those 165 cannabinoids, the cannabis plant also produces what we call terpenes. You can think of terpenes as the essential oils produced by cannabis, and they provide a synergistic entourage effect. And it's really the terpene profile of any given formula that determines whether it's stimulating or sedative. And, this is the thing. People think they can just go out and buy cannabis and it's all the same thing. But with 165 cannabinoids, over 200 terpenes, you can mix and match any which way. You can see how there's just such a broad variety of different profiles that you can get in that bottle. And unless you really know what's in there, you really don't understand its best use. And so having lab profiles on not just the cannabinoid content of a product, but also the terpenes is really vital. Because with autism, especially with those that might benefit from calming, we want to stick with strains that are labeled as indica. These have a terpene profile that is dominant in these essential oils that are more calming and sedative. Examples would be like linalool, which is found in lavender, that does tend to be sedative and relieve anxiety and be neurosuppressive. And then we have sativa strains, and those are strains or products that have a terpene profile that is dominant in these essential oils that are more energizing and uplifting. Now, these might be beneficial for children that present more like ADD, especially if they're responsive therapeutically to stimulants like Adderall or Ritalin. It might be a sativa strain that you want to seek for your child that's suffering with ADD, because they do tend to calm with stimulant therapy. They're kind of opposite of everybody else. And so that's the one exception with autism where I would say, yeah, let's go with a sativa strain or a sativa profile. And then there's hybrid profiles as well, which sort of have a balanced effect and a good balance of both the indica and the sativa terpenes. And so those are terms you're going to see if you walk into a dispensary, for example. And so the terpenes I really focus on and look for in products that I recommend for autism are myrcene. Myrcene is also found in mangoes, and research supports that myrcene actually helps the cannabinoids cross the blood-brain barrier and get into the neurological system. Now, knowing the neurological system is one of the major contributors to autism symptoms, that just makes a lot of sense. Myrcene also has research supporting that it's anti-inflammatory, which inflammation is rampant in autism, that it's anti-seizure, which oftentimes we see kids that have both autism and seizures. And it can be sedative as well, depending on the concentration in a specific product. And the higher concentrations, myrcene is known to be sedative. The next one I love is beta-caryophyllene. Beta-caryophyllene is a very spicy terpene. It's found in things like black pepper and cloves. Now, beta-caryophyllene is a very special terpene. We call it cannabinomimetic. And this is because it acts like a cannabinoid in that it interacts with a cannabinoid receptor, that CB2 receptor. It's also shown to have antibacterial and anti-inflammatory benefits. And if we're looking for something to target, for example, the CB2 receptors in the brain, if we have inflammation and CBG turns out to be too stimulating for someone with autism, beta-caryophyllene is a great alternative because it's still going to target those CB2 receptors, but it's definitely more neutral to sedative in its effect. So it's not going to cause that same stimulation as CBG. Linalool, I mentioned already, found in lavender, very sedative. It has research supporting it for anxiety and seizures both. So when I hear of a child with autism and seizures, linalool is one of those terpenes that I look for in a product to help them. Limonene is another great terpene. Limonene is more of a sativa. It's very stimulating. It's found in lemons and oranges, any kind of citrus fruits. This can be great for a child that is tolerant of some stimulation in their products. It might be suffering depression, so they kind of need that stimulation for the mood elevation, or if they have it in a motivational disorder, which sometimes we find with autism, gets them motivated, gets them moving. It also has some anti-cancer benefits, so that's another use. But limonene, like I said, once again, if it's a child that has seen benefit from stimulant therapy and tolerates that, then limonene is a great one. Pinene is another wonderful terpene. We find this in pine trees, and it tends to be really energizing as well. So once again, depending on the tolerance to stimulating, this can be a great option for helping anti-inflammatory targets and also for focus, which I didn't add to that list, but focus is another great use for pinene, helping with ADD, ADHD, and those focus issues that come with them. So here's a nice slide that kind of helps to explain how cannabis works in our neurological system with the endocannabinoid system receptor interaction. So cannabis promotes neurological homeostasis or balance through interaction with the CB1 and CB2 receptors in the brain and neurological system. It maintains HPA axis balance. Now, the HPA axis is linked with emotional vitality, with anxiety and panic attacks, things of that nature. So bringing balance to that can really help in reducing some of those symptoms. It's also shown to be very neuroprotective. And so, once again, we've talked about how brain inflammation is really common with autism, how there's different things that contribute to that brain inflammation. And cannabis can actually help protect the brain cells that have not been impacted from that inflammation and the damage it can cause, in addition to being a neuro anti-inflammatory and helping to reduce that inflammation. Cannabis can also help regulate our stress response. Pardon me. By promoting neurotransmitter imbalance, we talked about the GABA glutamate balance. It's so important to decrease anxiety, improve seizure threshold. The limbic system also helps with sensory and emotion. And so if those things are an issue, it can be really helpful. It can be analgesic and anti-inflammatory to help with pain. The CB1 and CB2 receptors also interact with the dopamine and serotonin receptors in the brain and help to balance those out. And oftentimes we see, different imbalances in those neurotransmitters in autism. So anything we can do to help promote that balance is going to improve the function of the brain in kids with autism. And then on the right, you'll see there's a picture. This really well exemplifies what we call retrograde signaling. And this is a mechanism of cannabis on the neurological system that is not found with any other substance. It's very unique. If you have a medical professional that you're trying to teach, this is a great way to perk their interest, to say cannabis works in the brain unlike any other substance known to man, and have them look up retrograde signaling, because it really is fascinating how this plant works. And really, it has kind of a negative feedback loop. And so it can not only promote balance, but part of promoting balance is assessing what's out of balance. And so it does both. It's pretty amazing stuff. And then we have how the cannabis works within the immune and gut systems through their endocannabinoid receptors and the activation of those receptors. And so immune modulation occurs via the endocannabinoid system receptors. And we can see either immune suppression with the T cells specifically by targeting CB1 receptors, which would be THC. Now, this can show some great benefits for things like autoimmune disease, where our T cells are actually too active to the point that we've begun attacking our own bodies. And this is what I credit in part for my reversal of autoimmune. Then we have immune balance support through targeting the CB2 receptors with CBD and CBG. We can actually help to promote balance in the immune system. And as we saw that triad, the underlying imbalances in autism, immune and gut are two of those three, neurological system being the third. So once again, very high impact potential here. And then we have gut modulation as well, which once again, we're promoting balance with CB1 and CB2 receptors. Depending on the symptoms, what we target in the gut can really differ. They're, targeting CB1 receptors can actually slow motility and might contribute or worsen things like constipation. So we want to be careful. We're targeting the CB2 receptors or doing like CBD, which is an antagonist or blocker of CB1, can actually improve gut motility and alleviate constipation and promote more of a balanced gut function. And so depending on, this is why it's important to work with a medical professional if you're not sure, because we could potentially make somebody's situation worse if we choose the wrong product. So the correct approach is really vital. Other potential benefits to autism include that cannabis works as an antioxidant, so it can help protect from oxidative stress. It's antimicrobial, and we have research supporting that it kills MRSA. And oftentimes our kids with autism end up with chronic illness and chronic infections. So this could be a benefit. I wrote an article on it. It's on my blog on integratedholisticcare.com if you're interested. It's also shown some antiviral benefits. Once again, chronic viruses can pop up with kids with autism that have immune system imbalances and can't keep up with everything they're being exposed to. And then anti-inflammatory, of course, we know inflammation is a hallmark of autism. So all of those things can be really beneficial for targeting immune and gut system activation. So there are considerations around trying cannabis for autism. It's not for everybody, especially not every form. And so we want to take a really individualized and well-informed approach. So obviously, if we're working with a pediatric patient with autism, which is a lot of them, all that's appropriate is medical use. We're not going to be trying to get them intoxicated with THC. And because it's medical use, we want to ensure that the parent understands that it's very important to seek physician authorization. Short of that, they could run into some legal issues or CPS, and we want to help avoid that, of course, whenever possible. And because legal access is a challenge, depending on where you live, it can be accessible or not accessible. There are even states that have medical cannabis that don't have criteria that support it being authorized for autism, for example. So THC can be difficult to access in some places. And then concurrent use of pharmaceuticals. If a child with autism is already taking pharmaceuticals, we want to have those screened because there is the potential for pharmaceutical interactions of cannabis and even combined effects. So we really want to understand what we're working with, what is the situation, and make sure we're working around any of these considerations. There are also genetic factors. One example is sometimes with autism, we have comorbid schizophrenia, and that would be a reason not to use THC because schizophrenia and THC don't get along very well. And then there's also methylation mutations that predispose the theorized neurodevelopmental risk factors of using THC in childhood and adolescence. So we want somebody that can screen those, help weigh the risk versus benefit for that specific child, and help the parent to work around those potential issues. And so we're really setting up the patient for success with their cannabis. There is a patient self-questionnaire that helps patients understand when they should seek medical oversight. And we do have nurse consulting through United Patients Group if that turns out to be a need. Patient self-questionnaire is at the website integratedholisticcare.com under the FAQ page if you're interested in that. And the patient being pediatric is one of those considerations where it just automatically says seek oversight. So here I want to talk a little bit about optimal quality products and their importance. Not all cannabis products on the market are optimal quality. In fact, it's only about 10% of producers that meet these flow criteria that are evidence-based and supported by research as optimal therapeutic quality products. And so FLOW stands for flower-derived, lab-tested, organic, and whole plant spectrum. And you'll see I did write an article that published in CBD Health and Wellness, October of 2020, that this is my most updated article on this subject. So it has all the research citations that support what I'm teaching today and what I've taught pretty much every single patient I've worked with since I've known. Because they say, as you know better, you do better, and I've been building my knowledge a long time and plan to continue building so I can keep up with the new research that emerges on this subject as we learn more. So flower derived is important because that's where you're going to get the most potent cannabinoid and terpene content, far superior to those that are deriving their product from industrial hemp, which often uses not just the flower, but the leaves and the stems and a lot of other pieces. Industrial hemp is also usually male plants, and those are potent bioaccumulators. And so they have a higher susceptibility of toxins that they're cleaning out of the soil. And so obviously you don't want to be using those materials for something that we're going to be taking internally as a supplement. Industrial hemp has many other great uses, including soil remediation. They've planted it all around the Chernobyl site for that purpose. It can be used for textiles. It can be used for eco-fuels. It can be used for all kinds of things, but medicine is not one of those things. Lab tested is very important because unless you see the labs, you don't really know what's in that product. It verifies the cannabinoid and terpene potency and rules out contaminants. So potency and purity are both very important, especially when you're working with patients that are going to be highly susceptible to any kind of toxic influence, which, you know, if it's not lab tested, there could be toxins left over from the fertilizers in the growing process, or the pesticides if any are used, or even the solvents that are used to extract the cannabis to make products. So we want to make sure all of those contaminants have been cleared in a product before we're using it. Organic is very important. Obviously, same reason, we want to make sure that it's as toxic free as possible, which is also verified by labs. Many of the labs now in the states regulating those labs require toxin screens as part of the standard for products that are sold. And then whole plant spectrum, very, very important. This means a product is taking the cannabis flower derived, and concentrating it as nature intended as closely as possible. And this means we're watching the heat of the processing. We're processing it in a way that really reserves the compounds as much as possible. And this is what's shown to be optimal for therapeutic use. Unfortunately, we have a lot of suboptimal products on the market that take the flower and reduce it and fractionate it and strip away many of the compounds. CO2 products are an example where they remove all but a dozen or a couple of dozen compounds, and then they market it as full spectrum when it's really not even close. And what the research says is that the whole plant spectrum products work better at much lower dosing, 20 to 25% of the dose. And they also have a much more predictable response in the body. Whereas products like isolates, which is one compound, or CO2, which is, you know, a dozen or a couple of dozen, actually are much more difficult to dose and see the benefits that we want for patients. So this is just, you know, what the research says. And if you want more information on the flow criteria, there's the article in CBD Health and Wellness. There's a blog article on integrated holistic care. There's a blog article on cannabisnurseapproved.com as well. So lots of information out there with all of the research if you want to do a deeper dive. I want to talk now about the autism and pharmaceutical approach. So when you go to a mainstream doctor that doesn't really understand the underlying physical aspects of autism, but they're trying to help families. Like I said, this approach to me is sort of like throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. So they're using not only approved, FDA approved products, but also off-label use of antipsychotics like Abilify and Risperidone, antidepressants and SSRIs, anxiolytics like benzodiazepines and Ativan, stimulants like Ritalin and Adderall, and anticonvulsants like Lamictal. And there's far more of these as well, but I just wanted to take a good little sample. These are probably the most common pharmaceuticals I've seen being used by the clients with autism that I have worked with over the years. And the side effects of the above medications are quality of life threatening, including extrapyramidal symptoms. If you're not familiar with those, it entails, you know, facial grimacing, walking or gait issues. There can be tics. There can be all kinds of really very obvious symptoms that is basically the body has lost control. Very frustrating. And as an aside, I know patients that took 1 or 2 doses of a medication and stopped when these symptoms began, and the symptoms can go on to be permanent. So very, very detrimental. Sedation, of course, can threaten quality of life. If a child is overly sedated, they're not going to be able to learn and meet their full potential because they're going to be knocked out. There can be seizures as a side effect of some of these medications. So we can actually create seizures in a child that wasn't suffering them before. There can be mitochondrial damage. Mito disorder is also very common with autism, so we could worsen that or create it. There's paradoxical effects where the doctor prescribes a medication thinking it's going to have one effect and it does the opposite. For example, it's supposed to be sedative, but it makes them hyper. And then male breast development is another one that turns a lot of parents off to the pharmaceutical approach, because these kids are already subject to teasing and, non-acceptance from their peers, and males developing breasts, of course, could contribute to that being even worse. In addition to the quality of life-threatening side effects, are also life-threatening side effects, including NMS, which is neuroleptic malignant syndrome. There's SJS, or Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which is basically like, it's almost like flesh-eating bacteria. We had a patient that died of SJS last year, who combined the wrong form of cannabis with the wrong pharmaceutical. And so this is definitely something we watch out for. It's a horrible death. And then there's also suicidal ideation, which, our kids are struggling enough with their mental health. We don't need to be adding, thoughts of suicide to the mix for them. So obviously lots of big potential risk factors of the pharmaceutical approach for autism that are best avoided. So then when we look at the cannabis approach, so cannabis has an unsurpassed safety profile. We've used it for thousands of years as our medicine. It's effective and safe for use across the lifespan, aside from the considerations we already talked about for pediatrics. Dozens of indications or uses that are supported by research. And this is not High Times Magazine articles. This is research that's NIH. It's valid when you disseminate it. This research will pass, even the most stingy medical professional that is just a Nazi about the research being valid. This will pass their sniff test. And then, of course, we have the THC considerations for pediatrics with the theorized neurodevelopmental risk. So we're always wanting to weigh those risks with the potential benefits. And also weigh the risks of cannabis with the risks of the pharmaceuticals, which is what we're doing now. So for autism, the outcomes are far superior to pharma oftentimes, and we usually see a reduction or even complete weaning off of the pharmaceuticals. This is always done with facilitation of the prescribing physician. And I can't tell you how many medical professionals have reached out to me after I work with their patient, and their patient no longer needs the pharmaceuticals and they're doing better than ever. The patient or the doctor will reach out and say, "What are you doing? I need to learn more about this." So this is a great door opener too, to a medical professional who might be naive about cannabis and maybe even have some stigma to it. Once they start seeing the benefits in their patients, that tends to kind of open their paradigm a little bit and make them more receptive to education about medical cannabis and the science surrounding it. So the outcomes we see with autism improve quality of life and function. The research supports that cannabis for autism is anxiolytic. It gets, lessens anxiety. It can work like the antidepressants, the SSRIs. It's stress reducing. It's pain relieving. It helps to resolve insomnia and help that child sleep. That in itself can be so huge for quality of life. Just getting these kids a good night's sleep can be life altering. Plus, it's targeting the endocannabinoid deficiency that underlies autism per the research. So very, very high impact. And the cannabis side effects are life improving. Like I said, the objective is never to get a child intoxicated, but if they do get intoxicated, it's not harmful, and they're euphoric, and it's promoting homeostasis or balance and putting them in a restorative phase that can help promote optimal health for them. So all good. And so once again, when you're weighing the cannabis approach with the pharmaceutical approach, to me, it's just a no-brainer that cannabis should be the frontline consideration when we're looking at how to approach the treatments for a child with autism for all of these reasons. So now I want to introduce you to Unity Formulas, and we have a special offer for you today. The mission of Unity Formulas, which I can help to contribute to the formulations and the recipes for those formulations. Their mission is improved CBD success, which currently the random consumer that purchases CBD and has a specific goal in mind for their health there's only about a 6% success rate nationwide, very dismal. And why is this? Well, you could buy CBD at most gas stations. You know, an uneducated consumer doesn't understand that not all products are created equal. You know, it may or may not be optimal flow criteria. Even if it happens to be one of the 10% that meet these criteria for optimal therapeutic quality, it may not be targeted for their use. They may be purchasing a product that's very stimulating and trying to use it for sleep. Well, that's like trying to drink coffee to go to sleep. It doesn't work for most people. And so this is why Unity Formulas was born out of my frustration working with patients, and you know, they would find a product that worked for them, but then trying to get it consistently, or having a product that's medical quality and targeted for their use, almost non-existent. So in addition to having the base product lines, we also do custom blending. And so this is a huge benefit if somebody doesn't, you know, if the baseline formula isn't quite meeting their needs, we can usually custom blend it and work with them and find something that will. And then we also provide free education. We have a free nurse hotline that anybody can schedule on and get a free call from a nurse to get their questions answered or to screen their pharmaceuticals. And really the goal is to probe the main barriers to success with CBD and improve this 6% nationwide statistic, because we can do so much better. We also provide free practitioner support. We provide them product training and a practitioner support hotline so they can call and answer questions, ask questions as well. And I often hear from physicians or other high-level practitioners while they have the patient sitting there with their office, in their office, they'll call me and say, what about this pharmaceutical, or what would you recommend for this situation? So we find that this is really helpful to help practitioners help their patients. These are also products with purpose, and I actually don't benefit from the sales of Unity Formula, but my nonprofit Autism Safe Haven does. And 15% of the sales from Unity products are donated to nonprofit Autism Safe Haven. And I'm pleased to announce that this month we got our quarterly check from Unity Formulas, and it was more than $10,000 that is going to help children with autism through Autism Safe Haven. So these are products with purpose. And United Patients Group is an affiliate of Unity Formulas. And we today are offering our coupon code of RETJM2, which you can go to the website, pick out the products. If you're not sure which products to use, you can call the nurse line and she'll provide you that guidance. And then when you're checking out, you just put RETJM2 in your coupon in the little, it'll give you a field asking for coupon code, and it will give you 20% off of your purchase. So this is a nice perk of purchasing through United Patients Group. Just as an aside, we also have affiliate, wholesale, and white or private label programs available through Unity. And Unity is cannabis nurse approved. So this is where we've done the certification to show that Unity formulas meet the flow criteria. They're flower derived. They're actually lab tested 4 times in the process from flower to final product in a tincture. And so we're very vigilant about that. It's organically sourced, clean green flower and whole plant spectrum, because we're processing it in a way that really reserves the compounds in the flower to our best ability. So I want to kind of review the neurological line of Unity Formulas. This is the line that was created specifically with autism in mind. And it was born from many, many years of having my suppliers custom blend products for the patients that I was serving. And once again, I have never benefited from a commission of a product sale to a patient. I've never quite felt right about that as a nurse and as a patient myself. That to me felt like a potential breach of integrity. And so these are products that have been tweaked for many, many years to really be utilized for these specific purposes. And so, of course, one of the predominant issues with autism is impacts of sleep. And sleep deprivation impacts the child, it impacts the families. It can be a really big issue. And so that, of course, was a big priority. And so we have the Unity Formulas product called Sleep Calm. This is CBDA, because CBDA is less stimulating than CBD. So we find it works better with the addition of CBN plus botanically derived terpenes. And the ingredients in this product are supported by research for targeting optimal sleep depth and duration. These are designed for evening use and daytime calming needs. So like I said, very sedative, and depending on the behavioral issues, this might be something that a parent would want to use during the day on their child for that quick calming. These can be used sublingually. They can be put into food or drink. They can be put into a capsule and swallowed. This is why I love tinctures, because they're very versatile, and we can usually work around a person's need regarding how it's administered. And we do have a certificate of analysis on the website that you're welcome to look at if you want to see the breakdown of ingredients in this product. The next product is NeuroCalm. This is similar to the Sleep Calm formulation, but a little bit less sedative. There's less CBN in it. So this one is really great as a daytime formula to provide neurosuppression and help with behaviors, for example, if we want to try to reduce those. This has CBD in it instead of the CBDA, so it's a little less sedative, a little more stimulating. It has the addition of CBN and botanically derived terpenes, with the ingredients supported by research for neurosuppression and neurocalming. These are designed for day or evening use, depending on the child and depending on their tolerance for sedation. This might be the answer, or the Sleep Calm might be the better answer. Once again, we have all the certificate of analysis and lab tests online, so anybody can go in and look at those. The next one up is our Unity Anxiety Support Tincture. This is probably the least sedative of our NeuroLine tinctures, but once again, still really beneficial for neurosuppression like we find with anxiety. And so this is CBD, which has research supporting it for anxiety use, with the additional of targeted terpenes that are supported by research for targeting those anxiety symptoms. So if you guessed that there's linalool in this product, you guessed correctly, because it has research supporting it for anxiety. Wonderful, wonderful tincture. Once again, the lab is on the website if you want to look further into that. So the NeuroLift tincture, this is probably our most mildly stimulating neurological tincture. So this has ingredients, all of the NeuroLine has ingredients in it that help cross the blood-brain barrier, that myrcene we talked about. This product is where we start looking at how do we provide stimulation to the brain. So this can be really beneficial for those with depression or those that have motivational disorders, for example. It can help improve mood. It can help get somebody up and moving. And CBD targets serotonin balance, works kind of like the SSRIs. That's why it's so good for things like depression. It can also target neuroinflammation and help with focus. So this is one that I take every morning that helps keep my brain fog at bay when it tries to sneak up on me. Because, chronic illness, it's a lifetime venture, unfortunately. And so we do have a certificate of analysis, and the lab tests are available online if you want to see what's in there. This is a combination of the CBD and CBG plus terpenes targeting this specific use. And then our most stimulating is the focused energy tincture. This is one that this is probably what I would choose for a child with ADD or ADHD that does really well on Ritalin or on Adderall. But you want to try to get away from the side effects of those medications, which, it's basically methamphetamine. So there are pretty profound side effects usually. And this is CBG and CBD with targeted terpenes added to help improve serotonin in the brain and also target neuroinflammation and provide focus support. So this one, we also have this one used by athletes that are looking for pre-exercise support. And so we see a lot of benefits there as well. And once again, lab is online if you want to look that up. And then, of course, for autism as well, it's not just about the neurological system, it's about the inflammation. And so these two products my daughter takes every single day to help alleviate her pain issues. These are the Pain Ally tinctures. We have a daytime formula and a nighttime formula. The nighttime formula is one that we use even during the day for her if we need pain control in combination with calming. And she will often start getting ramped up, and we ask her what's wrong, and she'll say headache. We go for the Night Pain Ally, and that calms her down and also alleviates her headache pain. So really powerful tools. CBG and CBD plus CBN for the night blend with the additional targeted terpenes specifically to address pain and inflammation issues. So very high impact. The daytime pain ally is moderately stimulating, mild to moderately stimulating. So really best for daytime use, or, you could use it for pain in combination with somebody that does well with stimulant therapy as well for focus. And labs for those are online as well. So the Unity Formulas website is www.unityformulas.com. You can go on there and look at the products. You can go on there and schedule a consultation for free guidance with a nurse by phone. And then if you're wanting to learn more about me and my journey, you can look at my Media Kit website, which is jennachampagne.com. And I thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this was really informative for you. And we look forward to being a resource for you in helping your children or loved ones with autism begin their cannabis journey. So please reach out if we can support you. Thank you so much and be well.